Leah Russell's back on the show today to talk about her new book, Yes, That White Woman Wants Your Baby, Stories from the Field of Social Work. That's a very grabbing title, and the contents of this book are grabbing as well. There is a brutal honesty to this book that is refreshing and also cringy, but it's that honesty that we need. We need to normalize conversations about things that we feel uncomfortable talking about. Social work, child protective services, things like that, government assisted programs, poverty. These are all things that need to be addressed, and the more we talk about them, the less cringy they are, and the more productivity that we can have out of them. I'm really excited to talk with Leo again. Hope you enjoy the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. But first, a message from our sponsor. Our healing journey can be difficult and might feel lonely at times. That's why I love sound baths. Where we can get together in a community, we intrinsically support and feel supported by others. And that combined energy can help us go deeper into our own healing journeys. And all you have to do is just lay there for 1 hour and listen to beautiful healing sounds. I'm a sound healing practitioner, and I hold sound baths on a regular basis in the greater Seattle area. You can find my next sound baths on my website at adamrealhealing.com. That's Adam, A-D-A-M, Real, R-I-E-H-L, Healing, Healing.com. AdamRealHealing.com. Your healing is worth your time. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Leo Russell. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I have a return guest. Good friend Leo Russell is back. Leo was on the show a few months back, earlier on in the year, talking about the Entheo Society and the DAPT Washington groups that she formed in helping decriminalize plant medicines in Washington State. As well as being an amazing advocate for entheogens, Leo has also written a couple books. The first book she wrote a couple years back was called The Black Sheep Manifesto, talking about how her journey with her grandmother having cancer and offering different medical opportunities for her grandmother and being ostracized by the family, which is a really difficult book to read, but highly recommended. My mom is going through cancer right now, and so a lot of what you were talking about in that book, I was able to experience in different aspects in my own personal life. But this book that you've written that we're going to talk about today, the title alone was just like, as soon as you told me the title, I was like, holy fuck, man, that is intense. So this book that you've written, the second one that we're going to talk about today, is called Yes, That White Woman Wants Your Baby, Stories from the Field of Social Work. That's a fucking title, girl. That is a fucking title. And I just read this book. I finished it a couple weeks ago, and it has kind of deepened my woes of government systems and the way that they're presented as being helpful. And as helpful as they might be, how helpful to the psyche of the person that is on the side of the government program that's being quote unquote assisted by the government. How is their psyche, how is their trauma, how is their PTSD being addressed, being acknowledged, even acknowledged, right? A lot of this stuff is, when child services gets involved in some kind of way, or a social worker gets involved in your case, it's usually about the child. And the parent is really kind of seen as the instigator and the person that has done something wrong, quote unquote wrong. And so you have a very interesting aspect to look at this, because you've been both a social worker and were observed by social workers at the same time. And so I think that's kind of what drew me to the book outside of the title, was your personal experience with both sides of this and the dichotomy of that. So first off, Leo, you're the shit, and thank you so much for being back. I love talking with you, where your head's at, what you're doing in this world. It's a really tough stance to take, a lot of the things you talk about and a lot of things that you push. And I'm so happy to have people like you in this world, and to be honored to know somebody like you that is putting yourself out there to make this world better, no matter what it takes. So you're the shit. Thank you so much for being here, Leo.
Right on, Adam. I appreciate you. So I wrote this novel, but it took years to write, and a lot of it had to do with I had the privilege, which if you're part of the government, I talk a lot about how we kind of create these cookie cutter parents for like the ideal parent, and then that kind of gets superimposed upon the public. But when you're on the side of the law, so that when you call the hospital, they give you all the dirt on the parent who's there with their newborn that's, testing positive for drugs or what have you, you get to this place of privilege because you get to know everyone's dirt. You get
Mm.
to see the therapy notes that are supposed to be confidential that we tell clients in the system, like, you need to get your ass to therapy. But then we blame them for not being willing to open up when literally everything that they tell the therapist can be used against them.
Right.
So I was always a person who asked why, right? I was always a person in my own family who asked why, and I was punished, I think, for asking why, not just because I was a woman, but also because I think generationally, the older people in my family, they, I'm waiting for them to die because I wasn't allotted any power until they're gone,
Mm.
you know? And so I think there was a real hierarchy of power in my family. And I always just kind of choked at the reins as far as power goes, because I am a person who questions and asks, why are things the way they are? Or why do we do things that way? Or why don't we do things a different way? And I think that's often a person who's a change agent. But
Mm.
as you know, change agents are often feared. And then later on in history, we'll look back and say, wow, weren't they an amazing change agent? But at the time, we're not really very appreciative of change agents.
Right.
And so here I was in the system. I was a licensed therapist. I was, ripping babies out of bad homes left and right. And then I had to deal with my own custody battle that went south. And at one point, I got put on some meds for anxiety. And then, if you look at a lot of these cases where people have like shot up schools and things like that, there's this kind of strange correlation that doesn't get very well publicized, but there's been a clear indicator of it, if you look at the research, that a lot of these people that are kind of losing their shit in their communities are, one, estranged from family. So we know that that's a clear trauma that we just don't talk enough in our society about when we become estranged from our family, what does that do to our psyche? I would say from my experience with my family, I literally was suicidal over what happened with my grandmother, because to be kicked out of my family and removed from her care after 20 years was so traumatic that I'm still kind of dealing with that sorrow.
Mm.
And originally, I don't mean to divert, but we had talked about the power of taking our wounds out of the closet. So whether it's early childhood sexual abuse, whether it's the stigma of having CPS on your ass, whether it's losing your kids or losing a custody battle, whether it's your family telling you you're the bad one and kicking you out, and you have to kind of find a place in the world again and find meaning and find your own family. And that's hard. And a lot of people that are drug addicts on the street haven't been able to find a new family,
Yeah.
So I think the more power these things have is because they're so secret, because they're so taboo. So anyway, I was in the system and I saw the discrepancy between the rich and the poor. Like, my son was going to school at Mercer Island, and it would take like 10 stay-at-home moms to walk their precious dearies across the one road on Mercer Island to the elementary school. So I dropped my precious son off, that I was constantly in this horrible custody battle with my ex, where he would be like, she was late for picking him up, on these dates, and, just everything that we were doing, I was ironically doing to my clients, right? Which are, she didn't show up for her UA this day. She didn't show up for the parent teacher conference this day. So everything I was experiencing, I was also doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then I would leave from my son's 1% community where his father lived and turn around and see the black little girl on my caseload that got dropped off in Renton or Kent on the side of the road. I think it was Renton, and had to walk like on the freeway home by herself at 7. Right. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, these black kids that are poor, like, no one gives a shit about. But also in some strange way, like the kids on Mercer Island, like those kids get raped. Those kids get fed drugs by their parents. Those kids get exposed to satanic ritual or whatever the fuck is going on in this world, that people are doing crazy shit in their basements. But we don't go for those kids, right? Because those people have lawyers. Those people say, hey, we have fancy cars. We have Rolls Royces. You need to get the fuck away from our private gated community. So I don't think we recognize that as agents of the system, we are part of the colonizer's fist. We are colonizing the people into being scared of having their children taken. These are already traumatized communities because they've lost children, maybe from previous generations, whether you want to call it slavery, whether you want to call it ripping Indian babies away from Indian families.
Mm-hmm.
There's a history of stealing children in this country, right? Slavery and what we've done to Native people. And so I think we have a hard time seeing that because it's cloaked within this vision of we're saving the children, we're
Yes.
saving the children, and we're the good guys, we're here to protect the children. But a lot of these families could be helped by services, could be helped by financial support. So really it comes down to a war on poverty, because if they could afford a fucking babysitter, they could go do coke with their friends, come back and take care of their babies like the rich fuckers do,
Right.
but the rest of us who are privileged, we can hire someone to go watch our kids while we go off and lose control and go to a rainbow festival or whatever the fuck we do. So again, there's some crossover in my plant medicine work because I see a lot of entitlement in the white plant medicine community.
Right.
And that's why I'm really big on promoting indigenous and people of color and other disenfranchised groups access to plant medicine, because I don't think we understand that we're gatekeepers. I don't think nice, well-meaning hippies see themselves as gatekeepers.
Right.
And so because I was going through this horrible custody battle, I think I felt like, wow, this is what the parents are going through. They're scared of losing their babies. And even when you get your babies back. So even when I got full custody of my son back, it didn't matter. Like the trauma was already there. The damage was already done. And there were parts of my time as a parent during those years when my son was young that I checked out because I was in so much heartbreak over not having decision making.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like when the court fucks you over, I think we don't even have words for it in the DSM, but I guarantee you there will be a diagnosis someday, just like there's a diagnosis for PTSD. Will be a diagnosis for being in the court system, because I've seen moms that aren't even in the CPS system or dads that are so fucked up by the custody process and the family law, arbitrary nature of their so-called justice. And I think our civilization as a whole needs to, in order to function, needs to believe that the legal system offers some redeemable qualities. So it doesn't want to believe that the law and justice are kind of arbitrary sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And like in my case, I had shit happen that my attorney was like, "Oh, I've never seen this happen before," and I've never seen it happen since. And it's like, I don't think we allow ourselves to admit that these are men, these are women, these are fallible human creatures that are kind of the voice of God in terms of making determinations and calling it justice. But they're humans like anyone else, and they're having a bad day, and they're blind, or they're biased, or they're projecting.
Right.
So the social workers are not always good. The social workers in the system are not always good. The system itself as a whole, because it requires so much like consistency of one type of parent,
Right.
which is largely based on like white upper class parenting.
Right. Yeah. That was a lot. So I've not had workings with CPS before, but I've done some research and some help with welfare programs. And one of the things, I mean, you touched on this right away, is that, if, let's say people that don't need welfare in some kind of way, they're not judged on their drinking. They're not judged on their going out and going, smoking weed, doing some coke, whatever it is, right? Because they come home and they're whatever, right? But if you're in the system, right? If you're in, let's say, welfare, first of all, every single month, in a way, you have to go to the government and prove how inept of a human being that you are to get this program and get this assistance. So you're already starting off every single month proving to the government that you're a shitty parent in some kind of way so that they can give you money, right? And now that they're giving you money, they feel they have the audacity to make sure that you're like giving you UAs, make sure that you're spending that money properly, make sure that you're spending it on things that are beneficial for you. Well, who says that relaxation isn't beneficial? Who says that going out and having a drink with one of your friends and blowing off some steam isn't beneficial to your family? That's totally justified for the upper class or the people that don't have welfare. And it's actually accepted. How many lawyers that I know that have a bottle of scotch in their fucking desk? Midday, they're drinking scotch, right? Whereas if you looked at somebody else that may be in welfare, midday, if they're sitting on their couch watching Netflix drinking a scotch, they're looked at as demonized, right? It's the same fucking thing, right? That person just hasn't had to call on this program, whereas this other person does. Relaxation and all those benefits should not negate the class that you're in, right? That's bullshit to me. And so you have this compounding idea of proving that you're inept, in some kind of way. And then all of your relaxation things that are totally acceptable in society are not acceptable to you because you're being given money by a government, right? This other person might be getting an inheritance from his fucking father that's never worked a day in his life because the inheritance is right there for him. Doesn't understand what that job means, what the importance of that inheritance is. Just you get a check every single day, every single month for just being with the last name that you have, right? But this other person is getting a check from the government. Again, it's not coming from them; it's coming from somewhere else. But they're being ostracized for every single fucking thing that they do, right? And then we're creating trauma in people's lives. We're creating PTSD in people's lives. There's a study with welfare that says, if you operate in a place of anxiety, right? So you don't know where your next paycheck's coming from. You don't know where your next meal's coming from. All of these basic, what we consider basic rights of humanity to build ourselves up. If you don't have that set and every single day you're searching for that, your IQ drops 13 points to the point of intoxication, right? So even if you're not intoxicated, you're operating every single moment of your day from a point of intoxication, from the stress, the trauma, and the PTSD that you're struggling with. Is that being addressed?
It's such a bizarre mind fuck to be like, I can't get help unless I speak over myself that energetic vibration that I am nothing. I'm lost. I am less than. You're like the great savior that's going to give me food stamps. Do you know what I mean? I need to degrade myself energetically to a certain level in order to receive this money. But if you think about the history of this country and how it was built off of land that was stolen and slaves that were stolen, like there's no reparations to these people. So they're the lowest of the low for a reason, because they couldn't have inherited land wealth. But now the irony is, in order to just beg for money, to be like government's bitches or whatever, they have to like deface themselves or demoralize themselves or put themselves down, even though everything in this country was built on their backs or stolen from them. So it's like such a mind fuck, right? So their psyches, I think, get fucked up in the process of going for that welfare, like you're talking about, because you have to degrade yourself emotionally or mentally in order to get the help. You have to kind of like hit yourself and be like, I'm such a bad person for needing welfare. And what do we do in this country? We kind of blame everything on the poor, which is like such a rich man's wet dream, right? But what's crazy is like in that process, you become their property. They get to dictate like, you have to do this in order to receive this. So by virtue of that, I think the public gets to judge them as like an extension of like the slave class. Like we own their lives. So then, like you said, we judge them for drinking and drugging like rich white fucks do. I mean, other people, other races do, but like just for the argument's sake, like I'm saying white fucks, but the reality is we allow other people who have money to basically, we don't police their actions. We don't police what they're doing. We don't say, what were you doing at 10 o'clock last night? And, all this stuff. So I think basically we've all just been co-opted from a young age into capitalism. And then everyone's on that scale where you get fucked to a certain degree. You're paying taxes to support wars for rich men to make money off of, death and destruction. And then you're guilted about what they've done to the environment, even though they're the ones doing it. You know what I mean? We have very little control down here at the bottom.
Right.
But so I think there's a lot of like weird stuff out there, like white guilt that isn't always productive. I think it's important for white people and people of privilege to take accountability. But I think sometimes like there's just a lot of guilt that I see out there that doesn't lead people to making significant change, like environmental guilt, it's your fault that the earth is like, teetering on the edge of extinction, but really it's not our fault. Do you know what I mean? It's been our leaders' fault and the rich fucks that are only care about money and their 1% asses. So, because they don't want the lower class to do like a French Revolution and bring out the guillotines, they literally have us all fooled into thinking it's the welfare class that's the problem. They're the ones on the streets all fucked up on drugs, and they're fucked up on drugs, I think, for a reason. I believe people are, the Chinese mafia or whoever are securing their base by giving them fentanyl, because if you look at the human populace right now, you really see a dumbed down population. And I think a lot of these people are really caught up in the system in terms of survival. So they get duped into the government job because they're like, oh, one day I'm going to retire and have this fatty, retirement package.
Hmm.
But for these social workers that I talk about in my book, a lot of them like have cancer or die of early deaths because they've just been packing on the pounds and sitting at their desk job. And I don't think it's a good high energy job in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
right? Snatching babies from poor people has its own ramifications.
What's the life expect not the life expectancy of a human, but the term of like how long do people really last in a job like this in social work? I mean, are there people that are like 20, 30 years into it, or is it like, man, 3 years and you're just burnt out?
Well, I mean, you see different types. You see like ambitious types that really want to rise up in the system and see it as like just a bureaucrat government job. And then you see people that never leave the front lines,
Hmm.
right? And I think some of those folks never leave the front lines because this provides their life with meaning, right? Like they probably don't have a partner, they probably don't have children. Like there's a lot of like kumbaya, I'm a good person.
Hmm.
I'm saving babies from poor parents and sticking them with the nice lesbian foster parents and who will raise them totally disconnected and away from their family, but I'm doing the right thing. Like there's just a lot of people telling themselves I'm doing the right thing. And I think we get off on other people's drama. We get off on other people's uh, tragedy. And so I think to some degree, we don't see that as a kind of voyeurism. It's like a lot of these social workers don't have lives.
Right.
They're like, oh man, I was up until 11 with these kids, getting them moved from a placement, and you're like, huh, well, what do you have going on in your personal life? Like, do you actually embrace conflict or deal with any complicated feelings or work through intimacy issues in your personal life? Or is it always about like these poor fucked up people and gossiping about these poor fucked up people? Because that's kind of an empty, shallow life in a lot of
Right.
ways.
Yeah.
But we tell ourselves, and then these people tell themselves as they work themselves to the bone and then drop dead, that their lives had meaning. But I wonder sometimes if we're feeding on other people's misery and then telling ourselves I'm a hero. You know what I mean?
The hero
Because I
complex.
think that's how the system dupes these people into snatching babies is they tell them, oh, these people, they don't tell them the backstory. These people had their land stolen from them. These people had drugs placed in their community. When you look at black families, cocaine was
Hmm.
placed in black families neighborhoods by the US government. You know what I mean? Like we created this chaos and this mayhem, and we're only snatching the poor kids,
Right.
and primarily kids of color.
Yeah. And that's interesting because, like there's like generationally now we're what 100 and 400 years removed of slavery, a couple hundred years removed of slavery, but slavery was around for about 450 years. Now, generationally, we've mentally gotten our way out of the idea of slavery, right, on a grand scale. But that doesn't mean that the effects of slavery aren't still there. And I can honestly say this, and I was embarrassed about this in the very beginning because I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I just thought like that. But when Black Lives Matters, when that campaign and that movement started, I was offended at first, and I was like, "Oh, what do you mean, just Black Lives Matter?" And I fell victim to that. It gave me an opportunity to look at myself and say, "Okay, Adam, what's really pissing you off about this statement?" And it's the fact that I didn't fully grasp and understand my role as a white man in the current understanding of slavery and how that affects our current generation, not my mom's generation, not the generations where slavery was, right? This is my generation now to where I understand that, yes, slavery is not a thing anymore, but it was a 450-year-old ordeal, right? So that's basically like, okay, I'm going to race you, but I'm going to chop both of your legs off, and I'm also going to take a 50-yard head start to a 55-yard race, right? All right, we're all even, right? All right, go, right? No, that's not fucking right, right? There's a whole class, a whole generation, a whole race of people that has been demoralized and put back into a way that it's taking so much to get back to where we're at now. And so the generation that we're currently living in, a lot of these people might not understand the part and the role that they play in the current structure of racism and slavery and the ideas that we still hold on to. So it's giving it, we need to take the opportunity as the whatever privilege you feel that you do or don't have, look at yourself and feel how you're impacting that. because your mentality, yeah, you might not put a shackles on somebody, but you're living off of the benefits of those shackles being on somebody, right? So understand where your place is, and it's not something that like it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is what I've done. No, this is your chance to step up and do something different. Help somebody that might be a little downtrodden. Understand where your privilege lies, right? And your privilege as a white man can still be barely making it by, but it's better off than somebody else that's just looked at initially and then judged, right? By their skin color, by their whatever it is.
It's interesting because I would like to do some kind of workshop for white people, but not like the typical ones on undoing racism. Because when I think about things like Black Wall Street, like there were times when Black history in this country was starting to get ahead.
Mm,
And then we as whatever, as American citizens, bombed these Black communities or planted drugs in these Black communities. But there were times in human history when the Black family, the Black nuclear family, was doing better.
mm,
Um, and so it's interesting because I think we've bought into this idea that it's like just gotten progressively worse without recognizing that there were pockets of history. Sorry, I'm hoping this stops beeping.
oh, no worries.
It's my IVIG treatment. And so it's just interesting to me that we really, when we buy into a lot of white guilt for me is very paralyzing, right? I've been in a place with white guilt where I've like bought tickets for like Black ghetto youth to go to a foreign country because I thought traveling would change their lives.
Mm,
And I was presumptuous, and that's not where they were at, and they
right,
weren't ready. And I was forcing that or pushing my middle class white standards on them or whatever the fuck, right?
right,
But my point is that I felt like I've done things out of white guilt that were not helpful.
right.
And so I think when I think back to the 70s, and I think that's, Adam, where we're going now with the psychedelic movement.
Mm,
I think I'd mentioned with you about this before, but like right now, if you look at men's clothing, I'm sorry to be so fashion obsessed, but men's clothing is very ugly. And I know you can go some places and find men's clothing that's less ugly, because I got into an argument the other day with a group of men and they insist that there's stores that have better clothing than Nordstrom Rack. But my point is that the clothing that I'm seeing for men is uncomfortable and it's very drab. And when Rudolf Steiner talked about the energy of different color vibrations, like these men are not wearing rosy hues. They're not wearing like pale yellows. They're not wearing paisleys. And there's very little diversity of like being able to wear something with a fringe or
mm.
whatever. Like recently, Brad Pitt wore a skirt at the opening for a film.
All right.
And people saw it as kind of like novel and pushing the edge. But I think he also did it to raise awareness around men who like to wear skirts and how, he is trying to stand up, even though he's probably a pretty straight dude, just for the idea that men can wear skirts. And I think it's what we're seeing is like the cusp of a revolution for men and men's fashion. Again, bringing us back to the 70s, where if you saw the Black Power movement in the 70s, Nixon's goons and the CIA and whomever implanted people into Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement to bring him down, FBI cronies and so forth, they all wanted to break up, they wanted to break up Malcolm X. They wanted to break up Black empowerment, because at that time in the 70s, you saw the anti-war demonstrations and Woodstock, and you saw a lot more love. Like you could see the Black Power dude with the woman that is all about, let me have my armpit hair and I'm going to be free and I'm not going to be what you tell me I have to be. And so I think in a lot of ways you saw a beautiful time when people, and maybe the good acid was still out there,
Right. Yeah.
that literally think that shutting down the good acid was part of their plan, like as far as MK Ultra. So you really see that during that time, they don't want us to hear that story,
Right.
So I'm not saying that Black Lives Matter is not an important movement, but I do think it's interesting if we're doing anything as white people from a place of white guilt, because I don't think that that's very productive. I think white responsibility would be a better word, or white acknowledgement would be a better word. But the white guilt stuff I've found leaves me more disconnected from people of color, makes me more paranoid about my relationships with people of color, makes me feel more distant with my friends of color. And I think 20 years ago, I felt closer with my friends of color. Um, because I feel like we are being purposely divided within our different groups.
Yeah.
And I think Seattle is interesting because Seattle is one of the worst cases of gentrification in the country. So the soul of the city, when you think about jazz, when you think about what Black culture brings,
Mm-hmm.
for me, when you've lost like your mini New Orleans, when you've lost like that Black community in Seattle, then Seattle has lost its soul, right? That's just
Yeah.
my opinion. I mean, I'm totally fine if people disagree, but now you have to go to like friggin' Renton to find the Black people that have been displaced from Seattle proper. And now you have Seattle, which is a city of transience, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
have you have people without real rootedness,
Mm-hmm.
and a lack of connection to the land or a connection to like feeling rooted. And that leads to another whole host of problems because when people don't feel rooted, then they're less invested in their communities because they're like, I'm going to be out of here in 2 years.
Right.
And also they're less invested with one another. And whether it's COVID or whatever, I have seen, which is I find very sad, like more people that seem very superficial in their connections with one another and not as loving, or I'm going to help you if you have a flat tire kind of feel.
Right.
And I think that's shifted and changed in Seattle for me anyway. And it's just interesting to observe. um, I just feel like friendships used to be different. Friendships were you could count on your friend to help you move. And now I feel like friendships are like, hey man, you liked my post on Facebook, thanks. Like, so that's not a very deep relationship. And maybe it's the technological culture that we're now so on our screens
Mm.
that people lack the capability to have like real like life experiences, like where you're helping your friend like build something.
Right.
So
Yeah. There's a delicate balance between like the novelty and the amazing opportunity to talk to, like, say, somebody in Pakistan right now. Like right this second, I can FaceTime somebody in Pakistan. I can see what they're doing. I can talk to them in real life. That's fantastic. But to your point too, am I passing by the person on the street that needs the actual help? Face to face contact, face to face communication. Right. And I think there's a lot of that that's missing right now. And I don't know. If it's a sway or if it's an adjustment phase because, like you were saying, like I can't tell you how many times now, because I'm active on social media mainly for promotions for, like this podcast, for the sound baths, the energy work that I do, but I try not to be on there with personal stuff, right? It's mainly just like, hey, this is the stuff I do. So I can't tell you how many times like I'll get people that show up to my sound baths that are like, I'm like, oh, hey, my name's Adam. It's nice to meet you. Oh, my name's Melissa. I'm actually your friend on Facebook. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, thank you for following me. Thank you for supporting me. But that doesn't mean I actually know you. Right. So like, let's create that in-person contact so that if I do need help or if you do need help, we can call on one another. I've been having to go back to Texas where my mom's at. And I mentioned she had cancer earlier. And, Texas, there's a whole different mentality. Every place has their goods and their bads, but there's cultural differences. And one of the cultural differences I love about Texas is Southern hospitality. Like, I can't tell you how many times I was like pumping gas, just randomly pumping gas at the Shell station, and half dozen people that walked by. Oh, hey, how's it going? Oh, great. Nice day, huh? Oh, fuck yeah, it is a nice day. Like, great. Thanks, random person. And like those random interactions are very uplifting for humanity. It's like, oh, that's cool. A random person just said hi to me. That upticks our energy levels because we feel like we're part of a community. We feel like we're part of something instead of, whereas in Seattle, there's the quote unquote Seattle freeze. And I do attribute that a lot to the transient nature of this place. People don't have a vested interest in the economic or in the continuation of Seattle. They're here because they work for Google, Amazon, Facebook, one of the big companies that makes an astronomical amount of money that doesn't care what the fuck they do with that money because they can buy anything around here. And so then this place just becomes their playground instead of the place they want to nurture and habitate and make sure that it's something special for their kids to grow up in, their kids' kids to grow up in. Right? It's just this like, oh, like you said, I'm going to work here for 2 years, have fun at the bars, make my little mark here and there, buy my sports car, and then I'm out to fucking California or Austin or some other big city that's following these same things, right? And then we're starting to price ourselves out of humanity. And that's a really fucking tough place to be.
And the disconnect between the haves and the have-nots, like especially right now where you're seeing so much happen with inflation, I just find that it's very interesting because the schism between the rich and the poor is getting wider and wider, and
Mm-hmm.
the middle class is being obliterated. And I just find that a lot of times the wealthy don't understand what it is that the poor are going through. And that's part of why I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I feel like the poor a lot of times are not understanding how these people are thinking that are in power. Do you know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And because they're so like insecure because their kids have been taken, or they're poor and don't have a place to live, like you mentioned earlier, having your basic needs met is so essential to any kind of mental health.
Mm.
And so you can't afford property in Seattle, right? So what does it mean to have to spend all your time, like, traveling places by bus or that kind of thing? And I just don't think we understand the implications of what it means to be poor in this society, because I think we think that we can just throw money at it. So a lot of the social services you see out there are throwing money at it, but I feel like they're throwing money at it in the wrong ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you're just not seeing any solution. You're not seeing these people rise out of poverty. In fact, you're seeing more people join them in poverty.
Right.
Um, and I'm currently living downtown, and I just see super wealthy people, and they walk by and they just ignore the people on the street that are lighting up their fentanyl and dying in front of us. And these people are killing themselves. And I can guarantee you they've all been cut off from their family. Even if their family was fucked up, the damage of losing your family is so heavy.
Right.
And I just don't think we talk about that enough. We don't talk about what does it mean to lose your family, because I think a lot of these people that are on the streets are craving community.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have anyone who cares if they make it home tonight.
Yeah.
They don't have anyone who cares if they had a good meal or they're taking care of their health. Presumably, the rest of us are living with people or have intimacy and connections with people where people are asking us, like, did you take your vitamin today? Or did you make that appointment to see the doctor about that bump or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we understand what it feels like, because you look in the sad faces of some of these people that are pretty beaten down, and maybe if they lost their kids, don't feel like fighting to get their kids back. They give up maybe sometimes more easily because like their mom beat them or their dad raped them or whatever. So it's just like, you kind of get to a point where you're like, man, I mean, I can't fight anymore. I
Mm.
can't fight anymore because I mean, God seems to hate me or something. And I don't think it's God. I think, God is kind of this elusive concept culturally,
Mm-hmm.
but we come into this world, and if we're Judeo-Christian impacted in any way, we're told that we're born with original sin. And how did we get original sin? Because women got us into trouble with that tree of knowledge, those damn ladies, right? And then you're already in trouble, but you're a baby, so you should be sweet and innocent and having just a bath and eating some nice food and relishing in the beauty of a cranberry or something. But instead you're like, oh my God, I've got this original sin I somehow picked up, from the time I left my mom's vajayjay and landed in the doctor's hands or the midwife's hands. Somehow I've picked up this original sin that now I need to work your entire life to absolve yourself of, right?
Yeah.
Like, what a mind fuck.
Yeah.
And I think in the same way, capitalism does a similar type of mental mind fuck that's similar, almost like a different religion that says you too can have the fancy Nike shoes and the penthouse and the hot babe and the Ferrari,
Hmm.
but that's a better person. Like, those are like more noble beings. So we really like put those people on like heroic pedestals. So then we feel bad about ourselves. Like, it's another reason to feel shame, but because we haven't achieved those monetary achievements. So I think we allow ourselves to feel poor to feel bad about ourselves, because no one is saying, oh my God, did you hear about that cool poor guy? Like, no one's like, other than Jesus, right? No one's really talking about that story.
Right.
And yet it's so funny to me that like these Christians believe in this poor Jesus, but look at how we're treating the poor Jesus on the streets.
Mm-hmm, definitely. There's been studies recently about social standings and how much your social standing within a social group is more important in your psyche than your individual standing as a human being. So when you're ostracized from your family or from your social group, that is a literal suicide, right? There's in one of the studies this research I was looking at, they cite the Jim Jones incident that happened back in the 70s, where you had 1,000 people. There was like 700 adults and 300 kids that all took cyanide pills and died, right? Because they thought that when they died, the aliens were going to come and take them up to wherever they're going, right? And so there's tapes that have been released from the Jim Jones situation where you're listening to people before they take the pills. There's a woman that stands up and says, are you sure this is what we all want to do? There's one Jim Jones and there's 1,000 of us. We're all going to die so this person can go. Like, is that really what we want to do? And that person was very adamant, very clear about their argument, but then was shunned by the other, 999 people. That person also died. So that person, even though they raised their hand and they were very, very convinced that they were going to do the wrong thing, that this was not right, they still took that cyanide pill and died, and probably had kids that died as well, because their social standing was way more important than their individual standing, right? And so when we take our social standings away from us and we take our family circles and our friend groups and all those things away from us, that literally does kill us, right? There's a part of us that we're social beings. Like, humans are social primates. We've always been social. We've always been in some kind of group. And when we're ostracized from that group, that's when the real shit starts to go sideways. That's when we start to break down internally. That's when we start to physically, mentally, all that stuff starts to go away.
But why don't we talk about that trauma in the same way that we talk about PTSD? Because I feel like it's a unique kind of trauma. When you think about this chimpanzee family or the primate family, and they're all being mean to that one ape. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're that ape, you do feel suicidal. When you're being shunned, even if they're a bunch of assholes, like they're still shunning your ass. I'm saying that is a trauma. I agree with you. That is so significant that makes people suicidal. And yet I feel like the modern day mental health system is like, oh, he's got intimacy issues, or he's got PTSD, or he's got borderline, but no one's saying like, yeah, but his family kicked him out. Like, right. His uncle won't talk to him and he literally has no one. He's that shunned ape. He's that shunned ape who's all alone, and the rest of the apes are being mean to him. Mm-hmm. Like, why can't we talk about that being its own trauma? Why does it have to be like somehow intrinsic to him, like he has borderline? I just feel like we want to make everyone disconnected from the impact of the community. We want to say like, oh, you've got depression, you've got anxiety. We don't want to say like this person, like a word that means what happens psychologically when you become isolated or estranged or rejected from your family or community, because that is a specific trauma that I think does make people want to kill themselves. I mean, I've felt serious depression and despondency that was very clinically significant in my own life about what happened with my family when my grandma was dying, and I kept pushing the natural meds and they cut me out of being part of her care. And I haven't really worked my way back into their good graces, but of course I wrote a book slamming them, so I get it. But I still want to be included, right? I still want to be included. Like, my heart yearns for that. And what I have found as a leader and as a writer, as an artist, is what we spoke about in the beginning, is that I really want to say, wow, this has so much significant power over me. I'm sure it has significant power over others. How do we take this out of the closet? How do we live with our wounds, which probably never heal? I mean, Adam, if I'm honest with myself, I don't know that I'll ever heal over being excluded from my grandmother's death, right? It's like one of the saddest things that's ever happened to me. And I think about her all the time, and I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm broken over that, right? Like a piece of me changed that I'll never get back.
Yeah.
And I'm grieving the person that I was before she passed, and what happened there, and that trauma, and that no one, I think we always seek others to understand our trauma. I don't think anyone in my family, even with the book, will ever understand what they did to me. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Because in their mind, they were just doing what the white Western doctor in his coat told them to do. They're the good guys.
Yeah,
And
there's
their
still a
mind,
justification voice
right.
back
And
there.
their mind, but their minds can never look past that. Just like the social work book
Mm.
that I wrote, my supervisor, who is the head of children's administration for King County, still hasn't bought the book and read it. I'm very offended. We're close friends, right? I wanted him to recommend it for the School of Social Work. And someday I'm sure it'll get there, but it just bothers me that he wouldn't read the book. But when I think about it, I'm like, he doesn't want to read the fucking book because he doesn't want to think of himself as a tool of this colonization machine, you
Right.
know? And like, I don't know, just like have the wisdom to accept that people may not be ready,
Mm.
and the ones that are ready will be ready, and just let it go, you know? But I just think that for myself, I have to continually challenge myself to say, are you okay leading with being in the wound? Like not being this perfect person who has your shit together, but like every time you do an interview, say like, hey, I struggle with my own mental health, or hey, I struggle with hating people, or I'm waiting for these fuckers to die. And that's not a nice thing to say. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like I've got my own bullshit or my own wounds, because I think if we pretend our wounds are all done and they're all healed and they're not like re-scabby or refresh or oozing again, we're not living, we're not growing. And I think if we're living and growing, then we're acknowledging like we're all babies, right?
Yeah.
We're all babies, and we all have wounds that like perk up now and then and say, I need some love, or I'm hurting. And I think we're in this world that's like, I've got my shit together and I'm the most fabulous. And I look at my Instagram and look at how many followers I have. And I'm like the coolest. And like everyone is just kind of fucking lying to themselves, right? Because we're all such insecure little babies.
Yes.
So I think the new rad thing, like when I said, like, why aren't we uplifting the poor person and being like, oh my God, I want to be poor like him. But like, wouldn't it be cool to uplift the person who's like a fucking hot mess, who's like, I don't got shit figured out. I'm full of wounds and insecurities, you
Mm.
know? I'm full of sadness and failures and grief. And this is who I am, and who are you?
Right.
And I feel like the more we have the bravery to say, I am a growing human being and I'm making mistakes, and I'm sure you're making mistakes. And you know, I'm so glad that we're here together making mistakes, kind of that 70s brother and sister love thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more we can preach like kindness into this world, right? Kindness, because you mentioned how good it felt to be in the southern part of the US and having people reach out to you as a human being and extend kindness to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something you see in Seattle, but it raises your energetic vibration. What would it mean if we started a kindness crusade of, instead of judging all these motherfuckers on the street, instead of judging everyone, we tried to be kind and do like acts of kindness to one another, or acts of love to one another. And I want to bring back the 70s hippie love vibe where I can say, man, I got some love for you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah. And I think that's, I mean, everybody has their shit they're working through. Like we all have shit. Even the most quote unquote put together person is still damaged on the inside in some kind of way. And so like, you know, my profession outside of this podcast is I work with sound healing and energy work. And I can't tell you how many people have come to me and say, how can I heal myself? Well, okay, first of all, let's take that word out of it, right? There's no heal, there's healing, right? We're in the process of. There's no healed. Take the ED off the end of that word, right? Let's just work on this right now, right? Let's not set an end goal. Let's just work on what's going on right now, because the healing is a process, and that process can last however long it takes. It could be an hour, it can be your entire life, it could be 5 lives from now. Shit, I'm probably dealing with my past life regression shit that I haven't dealt with like 20 lives ago, right? So it's that time when we have the opportunity to look at something to work on, and that's the healing process. But that's, we got to realize that the person that's on the street, let's take that person for example, their healing process and their damage that they've done to themselves is very, very blatant, because the support's not there for them, right? The house over their head's not there for them. The income's not there for them. That doesn't mean that the person that's on the street is vastly different than this person that's sitting right here talking to you, because I've got shit that I'm working through, addiction problems, financial issues. My kids don't live with me. There's all these things that I'm living with as well, but I seem like I'm put together because I'm not on the street. But to be completely fair, one bad bill that goes sideways and I'm on the fucking street.
You could be that motherfucker.
Exactly, right? And so we understand that I am you, you are me. I am that
Yep.
person on the street as much
I
as
am
I am
that person on
fucking
the
Jeff
street.
Bezos is, crazy rich ass, right? We're all the fucking same. And once we
Yeah.
realize that, then that idea of love that you're saying, like it doesn't seem so weird anymore to go up and
No,
to a brother or sister on the street and say, "Hey, I got love for you. I'm
totally.
here with you."
Totally. And I think that's the true mystery. If you get into plant medicine or you get into like transcendental meditation, like I think we are all interconnected like cells.
Hmm.
And that we had this illusion of separateness. And I think we get really caught up in like, well, what do you have and what do I have, and like all this separateness, instead of like we're all connected, we're all family.
Yeah.
And I think until all of us are free, none of us are free. So I think there's like a collective dharmic weight where like in our lives, like I just have this personal theory, like none of us can be truly quote happy, whatever the fuck that means, until all of us are happy.
Hmm.
Like I'm not saying those fuckers that are miserable, like, those people that are like constantly miserable and it doesn't matter what, like they just want to be miserable. And you're like, well, clearly you just want to be miserable. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not talking about those fuckers, but I mean, like in general, I think when everyone who can be happy is happy, then we'll all be happy, because I get the feeling it's like we're all in this boat together. And so we can't be like, oh, I'm just going to be happy because I'm Bezos over here. Like, until that motherfucker on the street is happy, if they can be happy,
Right.
then we're all of us can't be aren't going to be happy. And also I wanted to make a comment, like the food and the shelter thing I think is less important now that I'm hanging out with folks on the street more than friends or family.
Hmm.
I think their functionality is less about the drug use, less about finding shelter and food. You can always find fucking shelter and food. This
Right.
is an abundant world. I I think the biggest issue is, who am I now that my family has rejected me? Now that I'm that ape that no one wants, that is excluded from the group.
Yeah.
And so I think all of us can relate with that feeling when you say that that person on the street is you. I think all of us can relate with being that excluded ape. And that feels fucking shitty. Like when it happened with my family. And I saw that with my clients as a social worker. Like none of them were people that were being supported by their family, because oftentimes their families were incredibly dysfunctional.
Right.
But I just don't think we acknowledge, like we all need like a family. Like you love your mom, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
and she loves you, and that you have her support, and that's just invaluable,
Yeah.
because that support will be with you the rest of your life. Like it's
Yeah.
just being loved by your family. There's just no price you can put on that.
No, not at all. I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was talking about his mother. His mother passed away a number of years ago, and he was talking about the endearing qualities of his mom. And he said one of the things he loved most about his mom was that his mom was somebody that could always find good in somebody and was always willing to give somebody a chance. And I thought about that for a second. I'm like, holy shit. That's my favorite kind of person, because I was the person that everybody, I can't say everybody. When I moved up to Seattle, I ran up to Seattle. I was running from my past. I was running from problems that I'd created for myself in Texas, potentially getting arrested, all that fun stuff. So I booked it up to Seattle. And when I came up here, I moved up here with a buddy, but we didn't really have a lot of friends. We weren't really social. And so I kind of ostracized myself, but I didn't feel like I belonged. And I finally had a boss one time that looked at me, and he rightfully called me a dirty hippie. He's like, "You're a dirty hippie, but there's something inside of you that I see, and I'm going to give you a chance in whatever capacity." And people just need a fucking chance. People just need somebody to look at them and be like, "Hey, I see you. I see you." You're not the dirty, you're not the matted hair, you're not the half pants pulled down around your ankle because you can't, afford a belt. You're not the person sleeping in their own bile. You're a human being that's sitting across from me that has blood, that has fluids in their body, that can see, that can feel, that has emotions. Let's explore that, because a lot of times, like those people just, like you say, they feel so ostracized because nobody's granted them the humanity that they deserve. Now they're just a thing. There's something people step around. There's something people give donations. So I got some change. I'm going to throw
They're
some change.
garbage.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. It's an
garbage.
afterthought. So if we take the opportunity to look at the human being as a human being and saying, "Hey, like my name's Adam. How are you?" Let's create it from there. Let's start from there and see where that goes. It's it's kind of sad, or not kind of sad. It's really sad that we've gotten to this point, but the only way we can change this is by changing it, right? The only way we can impact this is by doing what we're talking about, right?
Well, and it's also interesting when you look at the white empowerment movement that is like upset about people of color like rising up and asking for rights, because I feel like that's more division that is purposely being placed in our conscious, like mass consciousness, to try to divide us. And I actually think white men in particular have a very unique perspective to be in a position to be change agents, because they've been afforded all this traditional power. They've been able to afford land and inherit land and buy land in this country longer than anyone else as far as this country's been alive. Like, they're in a unique position of power because they can share power. They can demonstrate the nobleness of sharing power and the humility of sharing power, that power is here for all of us,
Right.
right? And so when I talk to my white male allies that are like the good guys, I have a hard time sometimes because I feel like some of them don't get, like, it doesn't have to be a let's beat on the white guy scenario, like, season for taking out the white men. It could be a season where we uplift our white men and male brothers to not just be at the table and maybe scoot aside and invite that person who's kind of quiet and shy and who doesn't feel as welcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, that they have the graciousness to do so. It's like that estate, the owner of the great estate, like, who invites the field hands in to include them for the party or something. Like, they're in a grand position to open those doors even wider of that big estate.
Yeah.
And so instead of feeling sorry for themselves and sucking their paws about like how everyone hates white men, like, they could be like, you know what? I am in a position where people will listen to me. I'm going to open this up and invite Shirley and Clara and Yasmin into this. And
Mm.
so I really feel like when we see white men like wearing clothes, that, I know fashion seems kind of silly, but wearing clothes to express themselves, like, clothes are the only things we have to adorn ourselves. Like, we've gotten rid of our masks, we've gotten rid of our feathers, we've gotten rid of our big hoop earrings, like our big nose rings. Like, we're kind of boring now. We're just wearing like tattered pressed cotton.
Yeah.
But when we see, that's our plumage, if we see men start to be brave enough to say, I'm going to wear a fancy fedora hat with a big feather, or, you know, that, to show that men can be expressive and have emotions, that they aren't these automatons, these practical, like pragmatic, boring, like soldiers, that are being sent off to war. Like, there's a war on men, and I feel like men are in a unique position to fight back, to not only reclaim their masculinity, but also to show the world like how to share power. And I think being self-expressive, like, the more you, Adam, can wear bright colors like pink and red and
Yeah. Right. Totally. Well, I
a
think,
flower, a flower in your hair,
hell
or just
yeah.
whatever, then there's going to be a little boy that says, wait, I get to wear that, I get to be expressive, I get to wear a princess shirt, or
Hell yeah.
and I just think it shows, like, my dad gets to have emotions, my dad gets to cry, my dad gets to feel sad sometimes, my dad gets to be the one to say, I need a hug, I'm
Mm.
feeling low. Because I don't think we let men talk about their emotions or talk about their sadness. I think we channel them to alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and tell them that they need to drink more. I'm living in downtown Seattle, I'm seeing all these frat bars where these dudes are just slamming the beers, and it just becomes kind of deadening after a while. That's why I appreciate plant medicine,
Yeah.
because I feel like with plant medicine, you're not deadening yourself. Hopefully you're tapping in and healing yourself, but
Right.
it's not for everyone. But I would like to do more with men. And I really see you as someone that has some strong leadership in the men's movement, like
Oh,
your work.
thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I think, like what you're saying a lot with that, it leads me to the ideas of archetypes, right? With Carl Jung put out there, popularized back in the 30s. But, archetypes, like, let's take them, in masculine and feminine. That doesn't mean I'm a man, so I only have masculine archetypes, and I recognize or even if I recognize as a female, I only have feminine archetypes, right? We all have a balance of both within feminine masculinity. And if we look at, let's say, the king archetype has been toxic for fucking lasting centuries now. Like the one that we look at as far as the leader, like if you look at our world leaders, our CEOs of companies, whether they're male or female, there's a masculine toxicity to it,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's been drawn into it. So
Yep.
even the feminine has to be toxic because now that's what the norm is, right? The iron fist, the do as I say, the I'm with this class, fuck that class, that country sucks because of whatever reason, right? So now we have that as the overarching example of, okay, that's what it takes to be a leader. Right.
Yep.
But no, there is a balance of that archetype, right? There's a passivity to it, right? Now we can't go all the way passive and be like the king that everybody walks over, right? There needs to be a balance. So, but how do we get to that balance, right? How do we identify that it's okay for men to cry? It's okay for men to feel. It's okay for men to healthily get their anger out, right?
Yep.
It's okay to punch a punching bag and to
Yep.
fucking like scream at that shit, right?
Yep.
Get that shit out in a healthy way so that you don't dip over into that toxic masculinity. And
Yep.
again, that's for men and women, right? That's for whatever you
No, but
recognize
can
as.
we as a culture collectively hold space for men's anger? Like,
That's
and not tell them it has to be expressed one way or it has to look one way or
right.
whatever. So recently we did this event where we opened up a space because we have this space now in Pioneer Square that we opened up.
Mm,
And it was a Native American elder. And she talked about how by having the woman matriarchal like elder be the one to kind of lead our circle, but that it was a circle and not a pyramid. It wasn't top down.
mm,
It was just embracing the idea that we respect elders, like kind of new power structures
yeah.
of letting our elders. I just think we don't caretake elders enough in this society. So
I agree, and I think even generationally, we've been moving away from our own eldership, right?
right.
You know, in the same archetype, right? So men are masculine, it's sage, and feminine is crone. But if we have, I mean, we've had a whole generation for the past at least 30 years that we've been pushing to look younger, to act younger, to be younger, to dress younger, to feel
We're
younger,
right.
right?
We're not honoring the sage. We're
Exactly.
not
And
honoring the crown.
yeah, if we're always trying to be younger, then we're not embracing the knowledge we have. And then if we're not
No.
embracing that, we're not imparting that back onto the next generation coming
Wisdom.
up. Right. So
Yeah.
we're basically bastardizing a whole generation coming up from all this wisdom that could be given because I want to just Botox my face and put my ass in my lips and feel like I'm 20 years old when I'm 60. Right.
Right.
Embrace the fact that you're 60 years old and that every single wrinkle on your body is wisdom and knowledge that's been gained and can be imparted on that next generation below you.
No, it's very toxic that our culture is immersed with this preoccupation with youth to the point where we hate growing old because we hate death, because we hate aging, because aging is wisdom and we don't want to be wise, or I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
It's fucked.
And that's personal thing that I've been working towards is embracing every single step of my age. I have a gray hair, great. I'm going to name it, right? If I have a wrinkle in my face, fantastic. There's wisdom in that. Let's think about that. I look forward to being the balding 70-year-old man that has weird wisdom that I just impart on kids whether or not they want it or not, and then I'll spray them with the water hose and tell them to get off my lawn. Like I'm totally down to be that guy, right? Let's embrace our age and our wisdom and see where that gets us, right? How cool is this next generation going to be if we are able to actually give them the full length of our wisdom of what we've done, unabashed, good, bad, and indifferent. Hey, this is how I fucked up. Please don't do that. Or I think this kind of worked for me. Maybe this will work for you, right? I mean, I do that with my kids, but they're my kids, right? That's kind of like my job as a parent. So how do I get out of that and not just my kids? That's when we step into our eldership. Our sage, our crone, is when we move past the age of where we need to just focus on our family. Our family is now making families of their own. So now we can impart the wisdom and the love that we had once for that family to everybody in our tribe, everybody in our circle, everybody that we meet. I can be that fatherly, parental, loving, guiding person for everybody instead of just my two kids.
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that.
Well, what do you? The book is really tough and amazing, and it seemed like it's a compilation of a lot of the cases that you've worked with personally, but also some of the other social workers that you've worked with. What's your kind of over goal with this book?
I think I always dream about making my books into screenplays, like I'm currently trying to write a screenplay right now.
Mm,
I would love for this book to be a book that's used in social work schools across North America and hopefully other countries. But yeah, I feel like it really just has to get out there. And I think, with enough time and energy, it will. But I expect that it would provide an opportunity for me, like to do interviews like this one, but
Hmm.
to do them with larger and larger groups of people. And then that's a challenge for me because I have social anxiety, but I have to always kind of walk that line between like, okay, so this feels comfortable, or this interviewer feels comfortable, or I can step outside my comfort zone for like this allotted period of time, and then I'll go back and like regroup in terms of my own anxiety or my own need to recharge. But it matters enough to me, and that's where I continually am trying to challenge myself. Like as I step outside my comfort zone, I try to ask myself, like, does it matter enough to you? Like, are you willing to do this, to be brave enough to step outside your comfort zone because it matters enough to you to get this message across,
Right.
and to talk about this? And in my opinion, there's no other book written like this that talks about the child welfare system in this way. And
Right.
my friend who's an attorney who also works as a CASA, which is a court appointed special advocate for the court for the being the child's voice,
Okay.
he read it, and he is not an ass kisser. He's someone that is, like, I would say, overly critical of me. But for him to say to me, oh my God, this book, it was a page turner. I couldn't put it down. I read it and I loved it. No criticisms from like one of the most critical people I know,
Hmm.
for me was like, oh my God, like I think this is the one that could kind of, because I have a science fiction novel that's set in a different reality with Native American people and masks that are alive and
Oh, wow.
that are spirits and all this stuff. It's over 1,000 pages, Adam, and it's like small print right now. It's
Damn.
like Dune. I'm a huge Frank Herbert fan, so it's like the Dune series,
All
but
right.
Native American style. So I mean, and I've been doing like lots of other stuff like art and then opening up this center. And I feel like my motivation is to get out there,
Hmm.
right? My motivation is to get out there so that if I get enough public attention, I can like kind of preach my like, theory on what we need to do. And you and I were just discussing it. Like lots of it is stuff that I talk about in my interviews, but I feel like it's putting it out there so people get a different mindset. And I'm just about to launch my podcast called Strong Women in Psychedelic Politics,
Yeah.
but it's basically interviewing all these women that are like kind of like unknown behind the scenes in psychedelic politics. But a lot of it is me just like making fun of shit and being funny. And I've always wanted to be a stand-up comic, but I have a real fear of like crowd stuff. So
Okay.
this allows me an opportunity to be like a stand-up comic, which I've told lots of people. I feel like the way we can change the world, like like George Carlin, is through humor, like Richard Pryor is through humor. So I'm just trying to break ceilings, left and right. But I then get tired, so I have to take breaks. My husband and I are going to go to Spain,
Oh,
um,
nice.
and work on falling in love again and having a second honeymoon. And it's really challenging to just work on human relationships, because I think a lot of us that are very mentally oriented, we tend to do a lot of bypassing. They talk about spiritual bypassing. I think there's a lot of intimacy bypassing that goes on out there.
Yeah.
I myself think I'm guilty of that at times, where I'm almost more comfortable living in my head than I am having a human relationship.
Yeah. No, that rings true. I feel that. I feel that 100%. Good Lord.
So I don't know. In some ways, I feel like things are really starting to pick up for me in terms of finally getting like some of the acknowledgement that I've yearned for. But it's interesting because that's such a raw wound, from my childhood of being ignored, or my family rejecting me about my feedback about the dysfunction in the family
Hmm.
when my grandma was dying, like what my first book was about. So it's interesting how a lot of people, if you look at them, they have an obsession with fame or obsession with notoriety, and yet it doesn't matter how many accolades they win or how many Emmys, they're never satisfied, because
Right.
that hunger is so deep, because it's a hunger that never goes away. And again, it's back to the rejection by the family.
Hmm.
So I don't know, because my mom with a lot of my rejection issues, and she's passed away. I don't know that I'll ever feel like I'm fed enough. Do you know what I mean? I'll probably always feel like I wanted more and didn't get it.
Yeah.
But I think the more you can just sit down with your hungry ghost, whatever your hungry ghost is in your own psyche, and just be like, wow, we're probably never going to be satisfied. We're probably always going to feel like we're inadequate and a piece of shit, like, or that our mom didn't love us or whatever the fuck. And then you move on and you accept the brand new day and give thanks for it and enjoy the desert or the sand and try to get out of your head. But I don't know that we ever get over these wounds, and these
Yeah.
wounds kind of drive us
Yeah. But
if
yeah,
they, if they don't kill us.
yeah, right. Oh, yeah, there you go. And I, I applaud you for at least acknowledging the fact that there are wounds, right? Because there's so many of us that are like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I can't tell you how many times I said, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fucking fine. Leave me alone. I'm fine. You're making me upset because you asking me questions. I'm fine. Not fucking fine at all. Right. So I think we need to take that into consideration too.
Well, and it's also interesting because I feel like I've gone full gamut on healing. Like I bought the white man system. I didn't get my PhD, but I got my master's and I got licensed. I'm a therapist. I'm also a substance use professional. And have gotten licensed in that. And
Mm-hmm.
like I bought into the white man system about psychology and all this other stuff. So psychology is a lot about learning words, right? For compartmentalization, which is like another form of colonization, but this time a colonization of the mind.
Mm.
And I really find more and more like what I see is like unrootedness, like the transient culture in Seattle, is not necessarily anxiety or depression. I think for someone who understands what it means to be rooted in your land, to know this land with your genetic memories, they would call that unrootedness. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes I want to go through and re-diagnose in the DSM-5 what this compartmentalization we've done, because I don't know that we've made people any healthier by having them sit and talk therapy and learn how to compartmentalize their minds. Like, oh, I'm doing my obsessive compulsive thing again. Oh, I'm doing my attachment disorder thing again. You know, everyone has their name now
Right.
for their fucking disorders, but now it's even like further separation. So when you talk about healing, I think a lot of times people that think they're doing healing as far as talk therapy and psychology, they're in their minds, right? So they're buying into the colonization culture of learning how to compartmentalize. Like, oh, I'm angry at him, I'm going to put that in this area of my mind.
Mm.
Oh, I need to learn how to work on this, I need to put that on this list. And I'm just not sure that I don't know that I don't know if it's a good system. I don't know that I'm in favor of that system. I think like a Native American person or an indigenous healer might say, you have lost your roots, your genetic memories are lost, you are seeking those out, you don't feel rooted, you're not connected to your ancestors. That might seem more valid to me than I have a fucking anxiety disorder and need pills,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think we have lost this sense of connection to the land. We've lost a sense of connection to our ancestors, to our elders. We've dismissed them. We've been ageist and have dismissed the wisdom of our elders. We don't take care of our elders. We don't take care of our land. We don't take care of our roots. We don't care about our roots. We're all transient. I got my iPhone and I can travel, right?
Right.
So I feel like for us to say, I'm wounded, my family's wounded, my ancestors are wounded, my land is wounded, I'm connected. I know who my ancestors are. I know the blood that runs in my veins. I know the genetic memories I carry. You talked about past life stuff. I just think that when we think about healing, it's so much bigger and wider, but I don't know that it's more mental. I think it's gone down a mental compartmentalization route that's been unhealthy and keeps people very individualistic, very narcissistic, and very caught up in their
Mm.
minds.
That's beautiful. I love that. There's a book I read a while back called The Four Ways. It's it talks about like indigenous cultures and different ways to approach life. And one of the things one of the takeaways that I really it's really hit home for me a lot is the way that they look at an unhealthy or an unbalanced human. And there's four things. It's your ability to sing, your ability to dance, your ability to tell stories, and your ability to sit in silence. Those four things, right? Just four things, right? That's a good, healthy way to look at your life and how you're showing up. And for me, it was dancing for me, right? I lost my ability to dance and feel comfortable dancing. Love telling stories, love storytelling. Love singing, not really comfortable doing it, but I'll do it. Meditation, that's my fucking jam. But that ability to dance freely in front of people, and it's not just the inability to dance. For me, it's how I feel like I'm being viewed, how I feel like I'm being judged, how I feel like I'm not good enough to be doing this, right? So there's a lot wrapped up in those four things. But if you look at those four things, that's a good understanding of your mental, physical, and emotional, energetic constitution as a human being. And I love that. That thing is that has been like 3 years now that I've held on to that. Every time I feel like I want to just end something and not wake up the next morning, I look at those four things and say, okay, where am I going to do my work today? Because those four things, this is what I'm looking at. And it's really given me just comfort in that understanding. And it's, so yeah, to your point, there's so many superficial ways we're judging ourselves, which are never going to be met. They're never going to be conquered. They're never going to be good enough, right? So how do we look at ourselves in a different way to find a constitution that makes the most sense, that brings us happiness with all of the shit that we're still going through, right? That ED healed. No, I'm healing. I'm in the process of. I can be in the process of this for the fucking 86 years I'm expected to live in this world. That's fine. I don't need to fucking put that ED at the end of the word at the 86th birthday when I'm dying. We'll save that for my next life. We'll figure that shit out.
It's interesting. Carl Rogers, who's considered like one of the fathers of psychology, and Jung both had mental breakdowns,
Mm,
right? And both went away to sanitariums for a bit to kind of get their minds back.
mm.
And when I think about how we see figureheads in the healing world today, we don't see Deepak Chopra going off to have like a mental breakdown, or I don't know,
Yeah.
these other people. We don't see them, Eckhart Tolle. We don't see them cart their asses off to go have a mental breakdown. And I actually think if you look at Heyoka medicine, it's healthy to have a mental breakdown. Like it's healthy to let it all crash and spill to the floor. And
Mm.
I think a lot of us are caught up in like, I'm going to be healthy for the rest of my life and it's going to be stagnant. It's going to look the same, instead of like sometimes healthy is falling apart. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just think we need to get more comfortable with falling apart, because then we would be less judgy of our brothers and sisters that are falling apart, and that we put so much energy into looking like we're not falling apart.
Right. There's a Ram Dass talk from the 70s where he was talking about after he reached his perceived Ram Dassness, right? He's no longer Richard Alpert, now he's Ram Dass, and he adopted that moniker, and it was a character that he played. And he talks a lot about this and how he was stoic, he was happy, he was peaceful, he was all these verbs, right? All these things that he had to be, but inside he was fucking miserable. And as soon as he stepped off that stage as Ram Dass, he'd go in his dressing room and he'd be angry. He'd yell at his assistant. If he had a dog, he'd kick his dog, all this shit. And then finally he realized, he's like, I need to let this out. I can't just be a holy man. And that definition of that is not feeling my emotions. You
Right.
got to feel those emotions, right? And that's like, when people come to me and they're like, well, I've done so much work on my root chakra, I don't know why it just doesn't stay in balance. Because you're fucking living a life of imbalance. You're living a life out there that's just that every single step, every single turn we take can throw us out of balance. It can throw us in balance as well, right? So there's constant work that's being done. It's not like, check mark, got my root chakra done. I'm good. Now I'm just going to work my way up. No, tomorrow you might have to come back to that fucker and do the same work because of whatever story you've been telling yourself longer than the work you've been doing is still seeping back into that work you're trying to do.
Because there's a mind fuck with this linear time frame, that they teach us time is a linear construct and there's a past, present, future.
Mm,
But all of us know if you're revisiting those wounds all the time, it's more like a circle that's constantly blending, and we're constantly present, past, forward, future, whatever. We're seeing dreams from our past, we're seeing dreams of our future, and they told us that we're only one place on that map, but the natives believe that we're everywhere on that map, you
mm.
know.
Yeah, that actually that was I can't remember what book I read it in, but there was I think it's called The Sacred Serpent or something, where they talk about the indigenous, how they look at time as a circle and how everything kind of just flows within that circle. It's not linear. It's not, front, back, forward, beginning, all that end. It's all happening at the same time. It's just where we choose to pull out of the information and of the timeline that we're looking at.
No, I think that's like the truth of the universe. Like, I feel like once we understand matter and energy, and if we could like manipulate matter and energy, we would realize like all the space between the particles, like that everything is like touchable. Like Mars is touchable and
Hmm.
Uranus is touchable. And like, if we could just understand that it's all kind of an optical illusion, and like our past is not really our past, we could probably be time travelers if we could just figure it all out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just look at time. Like how often has time dragged by, and how often has time flown by?
I
Right.
know.
And that's
I
not that's
know.
just a construct in our mind.
No, and they tell us that time never speeds up, and like they don't know.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We're still in the idea that dark matter is surrounding us. It makes up 90% of the universe, but we have no fucking idea what it is. Right.
Right.
We don't know. And that's the thing. It's like, that's the beauty and the atrocity of it, is that we think we know, but we don't know. And so that knowing is like, it almost it bastardizes the idea that something else can come in. And so you started off this conversation with the phrase the hierarchy of power, and that, as soon as you said that in science, right, especially in physics, the hierarchy of power is one of the most questionable and just like kind of weird things because like take Einstein for example, right? Einstein, when he was young, still working at the patent office, he was pushing his limits all the time. He was testing new theories, putting shit out there. And finally, he started getting notoriety and started getting his, his stuff looked at. And as he got older, he kind of left that idea of challenging the new and trying to find the new thing. But once Einstein died, physics blossomed in a way that it never would have because all these people that had ideas that countered Einstein's, they couldn't say anything because he's fucking Albert Einstein. He's the guy, right? But as soon as he died, all these physicists were able to put their information out there and push physics and science in a way that we've never seen. But now we're at the same point, right? We have all those physicists and all these people that have gotten their information dialed in and that this is the information, but there's all these young people or all these different points of views that are not able to fully embrace and look at their ideas because they're being pushed down by the overarching hierarchy. Right. So as those people start to die away, these beautiful new ideas start to come up, and whatever field that you're in gets pushed because now there's not a ceiling anymore.
There was something that you were discussing when you were discussing like how we are infiltrated with these ideas around like worshiping like the all-knowing and not being okay with not knowing. And I think from a very early age, we are indoctrinated as a culture with the idea that we are supposed to worship the experts, the all-knowing, the ones that know, and that we are supposed to discredit or disparage the ones that don't know. So then we disparage ourselves if we don't know.
Mm.
But I actually think it's the smartest thing in the world if you're comfortable living in the not knowing. If you're comfortable living in the open-ended, that anything is possible, you're actually the greatest learner of all, the great, but we don't uplift those people. We say, no, we only want people that know to be upheld as like the ones that know or whatever. But really, if as children we were taught that not knowing, that cultivating not knowing, that pressing the boundaries or asking the deeper questions because anything is possible. I just feel like we feel embarrassed if we say, I don't know. If someone says, how are you? And you say, I don't know. If someone says, where are you going? And you say, I don't know. And we feel like embarrassed because like we want to say, oh, I've got my 5-year plan,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's beauty in ignorance. I was taught that by, I mentioned the story about somebody giving me a chance a while back, and this same gentleman taught me that ignorance is one of the best tools that you can have because ignorance creates connectivity. Like if I have a staff member, and this was in a management scenario, if I have a staff member come to me and say, hey, Adam, what is this? I can probably bullshit an answer to have you believe whatever the hell I say, whether it's true or not. Right. And that would appease that person. That would make me look good and blah, blah, blah. Right. But if I took the vulnerable road and said, you know what? I don't know. Let's learn together. Right. Now I've taken myself from this perceived higher level down to an even level now, because now we don't know together. We're going to find out together. Now I'm creating a relationship of knowledge instead of me just like pretending that I know what I'm talking about, bullshitting an answer, putting false information out there. Now we're going to learn together and we're creating a relationship, and now we're equal humans, which we always have been, but now it's on a very, very, very noticeable level, right? So there's so much power in ignorance. Right. And that's with my kids. I have a 13-year-old and 18-year-old. My 13-year-old is still in that why phase. She asks why incessantly. And it's annoying sometimes, but at the same time, it's annoying because I don't fucking know why. And so it's only annoying because I haven't been honest with myself to tell her I don't know why. Right. So those are those opportunities for us to look at ourselves and be like, hey, let's be ignorant together. Let's find this information. There's so much unity that can happen.
But also truth and facts can change with different knowledge. So the people that do know may not even know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's their perception of intelligence, right? My truth can be very different than your truth, right? And to have your ego step aside to recognize that in somebody else, that just because this is your truth doesn't mean that's the overarching truth. And that can be very factual information and very like kind of circumstantial information, right? It's all how you perceive it. And when we can open ourselves up to the idea that you're going to perceive this information different than me, and we can open the conversation up to where we can equally understand one another and not me try to convince you that I'm right and you try to convince me that I'm wrong.
Because also that implies there's only one truth.
Right.
Maybe there's multiple truths that exist simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I
And
think
it,
we've really been indoctrinated into the idea that there's one truth.
yeah. And that's not true. That is not the truth, right? Oh man. Well, Leo, I fucking love talking with you, girl. This is I
Same.
love these conversations. You mentioned you're in the process of writing or have written a fiction book.
So I have a sci-fi novel that's based on a Native American character
Yeah.
in a futuristic scenario, but it's sci-fi, so it has magic and it has like all kinds of, plots and twists and turns, but it's like over 1,000 pages right now, small print.
Okay.
It's like Dune if you smushed like three of Frank Herbert's books together. So I need to edit that. And I'm also working on my novel, The Psychedelic Problem Child,
Okay.
stories from leadership in the psychedelic movement. But I think that that's going to be a collection of essays and poetry and other interesting tidbits from my experience of leading thus far for the last 3 years in the psychedelic movement. But yeah, and I'm also trying to get my paintings off the ground, man. I'm trying to get a
Mm-hmm.
show here soon. So I'm just trying to express at every angle and then sit back and gestate.
That's beautiful. I've seen a few of your pieces that you put up on social media over the past like few weeks, and man, you are such a talented human being,
Thank you.
writer, activist, artist. I mean, you're putting yourself out there in a beautiful way, and it's funny because you said that you're kind of introverted and kind of scared to put yourself out there, but I mean, I think that's the best way to get past that is just continuously do it, right? And
Totally. I'm so proud of myself at times because I'm like, girl, like you are really like not comfortable and you're still doing this shit.
yep, hell yeah. And that's a beautiful example to lead. You're doing it for yourself, and the people that know you look at that and be like, you know what? Maybe I can step out of my comfort zone and do something that scares the
I
shit out of me.
hope so. I feel like I'm getting better at not being liked, because like as a leader, like you're gonna have people that just think you're an asshole or they don't like you or they think you're whatever.
Hmm.
And I feel like as a woman, especially, I was really raised with like, be a good girl, be a nice girl, make sure that everyone likes you. And like being popular was like the only goal that I should have. And I think I'm getting better at having people not like me. And for me, that's hard, like, but I do find it somewhat freeing when you don't care if people don't like you.
Yeah,
Like when you're like, they're allowed to not like you. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that's kind of freeing.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Then stop trying to like put yourself into a box that can be liked.
Yeah, I was really trying for so long when I started in the psychedelic movement to make all these people like me. And I didn't like myself in the process.
Mm,
And you and I had kind of talked about that, about what does it mean when you feel fake or you feel like you're living for other people and not in touch with yourself.
yep.
So anyway, I should get going because there's air in my line.
Oh shit. Okay. Well, Leo, thank you so much. You're the best. I can't wait to have you back on. Anything I can do to support you in your journey, let's do it. And
I would love
please,
it.
yeah, see to your equipment there, darling.
I would love it. I would love it. I love talking to you. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Leo. Be
Okay,
good.
take care.
Thank you so much for spending time with Leo and I. You can find links to purchasing her book, Yes, That White Woman Wants Your Baby, Stories from the Field of Social Work, in the show notes. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. There's also links to reach out to Leo and I if there's ever anything that we can do to assist you in your journey. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Basis and Love. We'll see you next time.